I'm a Perconian. I've been with Percona for approximately 14 years now. I've been in several different roles here at Percona, just so you know who I am. I've worked as a MySQL consultant. I've also been in charge of the PMM project. So my passions lie within the MySQL database technologies, and I'm also very excited when it comes to things like observability and monitoring. And today we're going to talk about some of the different types of stories. Being a consultant, I've had the opportunity to work with tens or hundreds of our different types of customers. And today we're going to share a lot of where Percona comes into the market and what we can do with regards to 3 different examples of database environments. And perhaps you'll hear some echoes of how it applies to you, or perhaps maybe you'll just find these as interesting side stories. We're going to focus on MySQL technologies and MongoDB, but we're going to actually talk through this discussion here about all of the different ways that Percona could help you within your environment. Okay, so when we talk about this, we want to give you that look, that little pull the curtain back, that behind the scenes kind of view over what we see when someone calls us in and says, hey, there's a problem here. Now, I have nothing to do with yesterday's outage with Cloudflare, but I would imagine that there were some nervous people yesterday hunting around for someone to give them a hand. And I understood it actually was a database error related to ClickHouse and some other technologies that, at Percona we use, because ClickHouse is actually a database part of PMM. But in that sort of world, I can understand sometimes how people can have a little bit of concern over the failure of their web platforms and other operations. And we see, again, we're reminded even in 2025, how important the database is to the operational capacity and functionality of your application. Without that application up, there's no revenue being generated. So I think yesterday was kind of an apropos situation with Cloudflare going down and today having this opportunity. And I don't know if it was related, but also yesterday was my birthday. So maybe they were choosing to celebrate it, a quiet time on the internet so we could all reflect. I exaggerate, I'm joking. But I'm really glad to be here with you guys. And what I'll be talking about is also how, like I mentioned, how the customers have worked with Percona, some of the different ways that we've been able to assist them, okay? And then we're gonna wrap up with some different ways that those lessons were applied to them, what some of their feedback from those customers are, and where they are today, and basically different ways that you can take advantage of those same benefits that these customers achieved working with Percona. Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways that we look at this. We focus a lot on how helping customers can enable them to look at their platform, their operations from a much higher level. What does that mean? It means that you don't get stuck messing around with the low-level details as often. You lean on a trusted partner such as us. We work with many different industries. We see the different types of problems they have. We have a strong support organization. We also have a strong consulting organization, such as that I belong to, and our managed services. Amongst all of these groups, we've got professionals in all of the database technologies that we work with. And so we've probably seen the sort of problem that you're having today. We've probably seen it before, and several times have we seen it, thanks to our multiple years, or more than a decade of history that Percona's been around. Okay, so you can trust us. We've seen these problems before, and we really want to be able to help you and improve it, because other environments are similar to yours. Your app is obviously unique to the industry, et cetera, but we have seen similar problems as we've canvassed the different types of users of MySQL, PostgreSQL, and MongoDB. And really, again, I mentioned it again, I want to pull back that curtain. I want to be able to show you how we've been able to talk to some of these customers and how we've been able to resolve their problems on their behalf. Okay. So why trust us, though? We've heard different already from several different speakers over where Percona is positioned in the market and different ways that we work with our customers. But we can also look at some hard numbers here. We have over 700 different customers that have worked with us. That's over 700 different organizations, and that probably means thousands of people that have interacted with us over the decade plus of time that we've been in the market. We've also get around 300,000 blog views per month. That's fairly busy. Okay, that means that we have traction. That means that we have eyeballs on our content, and that means that our content is valuable to someone. People don't look at stuff that isn't valuable anymore, and so we feel very proud that we can generate that level of eyes on our blog posts. That's key for us. And finally, it says blog views here. I think this is an updated. It's actually 4.2 million downloads, not blog views. So we also have a lot of software distribution. We've talked earlier about it. What does that actually mean? We have our own versions of MySQL, of PostgreSQL, and also of Mongo. We take that upstream and we make it a bit better visibility, better performance, etc. And that when Percona is releasing that software to you, we're doing it. It's effectively selfish. It's self-motivating from us. we, the database consultants and professionals, say to our engineering teams a lot of times, we think we need this new feature. Upstream isn't doing it. Let's get it off the ground, because we have multiple customers asking for this type of feature or bug fix, and it helps us prioritize what we think and what we understand is important from the market. And so that's where our software kind of stands on its own as an open source solution to help our users with their database complexity in their database environments. Okay. And we also work with, I mentioned a couple times, customers across many different types of industries. We're not just pinned in the, the gaming or the fintech or anything. We actually spread across a lot of them. I've worked with all of these different types of customers here. Our different types of insurance. We're going to talk about them in one of our stories. We're also going to talk about I have to be careful that I don't mention any names, but we're going to talk about an environment that had a lot of daily deals and was a very busy website until things didn't go so well for them. But the point is that we've been able to help a lot of different customers in a lot of different ways. And here's some of those labels that I would imagine, some of those brands that you recognize. And they trust us, and we hope that you'll find a way to trust us as well if you're not already a customer of ours. Okay, and so when we get into these stories, right, the idea isn't always that performance is the goal. For many people, it is. They often want to go from something that's really slow to something that's better. But at this point in time, in 2025, a lot of this has been optimized. And yet the struggle with databases still remains that you've got to maintain them. They aren't a maintenance-free piece of software. In fact, their criticality level is that high. We talked already a little bit about Cloudflare and how a database can take down your whole app, basically took down the internet because of an error. And so performance is critical, uptime is critical, but there are other components that go along with it. Sometimes you need to sacrifice performance or uptime to enable some other feature that's important to the business or to your customers. And those sometimes come in around security and compliance. Security teams are very powerful. They have a responsibility to the business that it remains a continuing opportunity, that the business remains solvent, that it doesn't go under because we've made some sort of an ad hoc change in the database and we leaked some secrets. That could end a business. And so sometimes you have to give up. Maybe that costs you performance in order to gain some level of security. And sometimes as you move to larger deployments, thinking about strategic or architecture here, sometimes you can't get performance as high as it is if you say, well, perhaps, I don't know, I want to be a global property. I want to have data centers in Singapore and in Ireland and in US East. When you desire that level of deployment, you can get pretty good performance, but compare that against being in a single region or availability zone. Again, you can often do a lot better throughput if you consolidate everything into one place rather than trying to distribute and make everything stay in sync. And so the idea is that you probably need all of these types of the performance and the uptimes and the strategic evolution of your apps. And so they all go hand in hand, and we need to make trade-offs here. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about how some of these customers had to make some of those types of trade-offs. Okay, and so we'll begin here. This is a MySQL one. This is based on PXC. This is an organization that came to us and was very happy initially with the concept of PXC. If you're not familiar with it, I'll spend a quick moment here. It stands for Percona Extra DB Cluster. And what it really means is it's MySQL, upstream MySQL, enhanced with Percona Server. So it's Percona Server for MySQL, and then enhanced a little bit more with what are known as the Galera or the CoderShip libraries, which gives us what's known as write-set replication, or WSRep for short. A lot of word jumble there. The idea is with PXC, you run it in a cluster of several nodes, usually deployed in odd numbers, so you have quorum and never a split brain. The point is you've got multiple nodes. And for this customer, they achieved a very high level of availability. That is the point of PXC. You put it on a local LAN, and you make it so that the relationship, the latency is very, very low between them. And because of this virtual consistency component of write-set replication, when you write to one node, before the database acknowledges it to your application server, it has to then make sure all the other nodes do something what's called a certification. The idea is just, if one node says, I want to update this record, are all of the other nodes going to eventually later say yes? That's what certification is. So as you can imagine, that's great for consistency, but the hit or the pain point is that it's performance impacting, okay? And so that means there's a latency overhead that occurs with every single write. In this customer's case, That was acceptable. These were local LAN speeds. These were millisecond, maybe less than a millisecond overhead. They were happy with the fact that they could take backups off of other nodes, that they could take maintenance, they could put other services in front of it and not witness any downtime because failovers were happening very fluidly. So it was great from a high availability perspective. But this customer struggled with two main components. One was the data set got very large, and that led to very long, what are known as SSTs, which are known as state transfers. If you can imagine, we take away all of that word jumble, it really just means you identify a node in the cluster that's failed. We have to recover that node. How do you do that? Like everything else, you have to give it a copy of the existing data set. So that means an SST means another node in your 3-node cluster. Remember, you had 3, you're down to 2 because one of them went offline and now needs to receive some information, the data set. You go to another node and you say, can you be the donor to give it to this receiver? Of course I can. What that does is it puts pressure on that second node. The SST runs, it's an extra backup. It takes a lot of CPU and disk reads. And so you're in somewhat of a degraded state ×2. You've lost a node, so you're down from 3 to 2. And you're also now asking one of the remaining nodes to do an extra bit of work. So PXE is great when your data set stays low. Low, I'm going to say, is 200 gigs, something around that, something that can get done in an hour or two with our high-speed networks today. In this customer's case, they were not that aggressive on their archiving, and what that led to were several terabytes of data set. Again, not all that uncommon in today's world, but the challenge is with an SST, all of that data has to be copied, okay? So when we're talking about copying 4, 5, 6 terabytes, now we're talking hours, maybe 24 hours, perhaps a full day. That's a very long time to be in a degraded state, okay? So the problem with that was that's the first issue of it. Their data set got very large, and that can happen to anybody, and that can happen when you're in a single region. But at the same time, because the data set got large, or because of business growing, the data set got large, you know, one led the other. Well, now they would say, well, we want to do this more regional approach. They didn't yet go globally, but they did say, I want to be in multiple regions. And that's completely functional from a PXE perspective. But the challenge is, as you recall, I mentioned about the certification, when now we're doing things cross-country or maybe going across an ocean, that is non-negligible overhead, and you're paying that penalty on every single write. So from the user's perspective of this application, when they went to multi-region PXE, everything just got slow. Reads were still fast, but the writes were noticeably slower. Unacceptable, was decided that it led to abandonment and other issues, and they needed to do something about it. We worked with them. They came to us. They already trusted us. We'd been supporting PXE for them for a couple of years and got it going as best as we can. But even Percona is good, but we can't beat the speed of light. Electrons take a certain amount of time, or photons from one perspective, from one point to another. Okay, so there we were. And we said, well, this is the best you could do with PXE. This is just how it works. Well, what else have you got for us? And we said, well, there's other opportunities. The big one that we led them down and that we believe, you know, they're very happy with, and so are we with, because it's still very much supported. It's the approach of not using PXE, but still MySQL, using Percona server for MySQL. And instead of it being based on this synchronization that has to occur, this certification, writes in Percona server for MySQL are just local to the given instance, which is great. So they go very quick. And then we let asynchronous replication get the data down to replicas so we can scale our read capacity. And that works when you move that data also across multiple different regions or availability zones. That latency, I mean, still exists, but you don't pay it on write. You might have to pay it in a different way. You pay it because maybe you don't want to do a stale read from a lagging replica, but that's a different problem. And to deal with that problem, we also paired it with two other tools they hadn't been using. One of them is called Proxy.SQL, and the other is Orchestrator, MySQL Orchestrator. Proxy.SQL is probably the more popular, but maybe you've heard of both. Proxy.SQL is just that. The beautiful thing about it, it's a layer 7 proxy. So it's a little bit smarter than, say, MySQL Router, a little bit smarter than HA Proxy, because those protocols, those proxies only work at layer 4, okay? So what does that mean, working at layer 7? That means Proxy.SQL can look at your query and say, this is a select. Okay, I know what to do with selects. I can send it to the main writer because I need it to be really quick. I can't tolerate any latency. Or I can send it to a replica. I can distribute that. It can be a geographically located replica to my user. If the user's in Ireland and have a data center there, read from Ireland. Don't send that request back to wherever the primary data center might be, in US East, for example. So the idea is with Proxy SQL, you could do much better job of query routing. And that also means is when failures occur, you don't lose anything. Promotion happens, and it happens through Orchestrator, which I'll mention again in a moment. But Proxy SQL makes it so that your users in front of a browser, or your users in terms of applications accessing your database, just don't worry about where the endpoints are anymore. Okay, you find Proxy SQL, and Proxy SQL takes it from there. It finds your backends. And then finally, how does all of this failover happen? How does it do detection of failures of nodes, et cetera? That's the responsibility of Orchestrator. Okay, so Orchestrator gives you a really clean way of, it does health checks, proactive health checks, and says if nodes fail, whether it's writers or readers, through a combination of setting read-only variables and change source statements and things like that, it can rejig the hierarchy and do this all transparently behind anything without your app seeing it, because Proxy SQL hides all of this. It just discourages the app from knowing about what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so what we did is we moved them out of a high latency, multi-region solution, which was great when they were smaller and starting, but didn't scale as well as they'd hoped because of their business ambitions. And we moved them into something that works at a global level. Okay, so that's one way that we help move somebody from one technology to another while staying generally within the same database technology. And so I'll leave on that note, because that's one of the biggest wins, I think, for many organizations. It's you have tech debt. You know that maybe I'm not going to say there was a better database in this scenario, but sometimes when you're reevaluating things, you might think about changing everything. You might think, well, if this database and this scenario isn't working, throw the baby out with the bathwater and let's just start something greenfield. Sometimes that's the right solution, but sometimes that you can get mired in that and maybe never come out of it. So what we try to do in this scenario, instead of referring them to Mongo or Postgres or some other technology, which we'd still be happy supporting them, no, let's explore what MySQL can still do for you. And we were glad that we could find a fit that worked with them and also worked very well with us from our support perspective. Okay. So we like working with these types of, me personally, I like more challenging engagements. I like it when there's a tricky problem in front of me. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that are our bread and butter. And what we were able to do is we were able to save them a lot of money in a lot of their maintenance time. They were spending a lot of time looking over their shoulders, worrying about SSTs, are they going to complete on time? They were worried about, like, is the latency going to be bad like it was yesterday? Surprise, it is. There's nothing you could do but the speed of light, the photons, and the electrons moving on the wires. So on that old technology, it just wasn't going to go anywhere. There was no magic tuning or wand we could do anymore. And they were happy that we still left them with something that didn't force a very large retraining on their team. Of course, MySQL is a little bit different than PXE in terms of how you do things around error handling and transaction rollbacks, but it's still MySQL at the core. It's not a completely different database technology. Okay, and so from their perspective, that was very good. That didn't have to lead to any layoffs, and in fact, it led their team. When they moved on with us, is they were able to then work at a higher level of their environment, focusing on schema and working with their application teams, and less about the day-to-day, is the schema change going to complete? Leave that to Percona. We'll handle that type of stuff for them. So they got more of a cloud-like experience with those database as a service products that they could buy, but they were spending even less because they remained on EC2, so they didn't pay the tax that you have with a lot of these cloud provider behind a barrier kind of scenarios that you get into. So all in all, a very successful engagement with this customer. Okay. Now this one, it's another MySQL story. And in this particular case, it was me that worked with them. So I know this story inside and out. And again, I can't mention any names, but this occurred back in around 2013, 2014, something like that. Okay, I was a newly minted, maybe 2 years into my role, and very excited to be working with a very large daily deals website doing some full-time equivalent work for them. I was working my afternoons with these guys. And what happened is they were looking to expand into multiple data centers. They were looking to grow their business. They wanted the high availability and the failover and all of that other stuff that you can get by being in multiple regions. Great. Now, again, remember, this is still 10 years ago, but the internet was fast and there were no concerns other than the fact that there's replication between environments. And these guys were running regular MySQL, asynchronous replication. we had talked, myself, I remember this vividly. I had said, going into the weekend, I think it was, hey, boss, my guy at the organization, I noticed we had done all of our failover, we got all the equipment set up, but the last thing we hadn't done was set up the backups. He replies back and he said, hey, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll get to that on Monday or to some near point in the future. Okay, and I mean, I'm just a guy. I was ready to begin my weekend, you know. Okay, great. We got it under control. We'll talk later. Okay, we come back in and it's not Monday anymore. I think it was a Tuesday, but we still didn't get the backups done. We knew we should have and we didn't. And this customer had a test suite. Oh, I hope this puts fear in you and I hope you take a lesson away from this. This environment was based on Ruby. They had multiple environments. They had production, non-prod, staging, all of these things. But what they hadn't done, and nobody knew this, but they kept the same passwords for the databases between their production and non-prod environments. On its own, not the end of the world. Probably the security guys wouldn't be so happy, but what's that? Who cares? Well, somebody ran a test suite. Somebody forgot to update the environment to be staging or whatever dev environment. Instead, it said prod. And the very first thing this test suite did is it dropped one of their main databases. Can you imagine? Nobody knows what just happened, but the website went dark. Nothing's clicking. 500 errors everywhere. Hair on fire. I don't know if you've been there. I would not encourage it. It is a thing to talk about in a talk, and I get chills thinking about it, but I did not enjoy hearing that message from the guy saying, hey, do you think we could recover some of the data from backups? And I said, do you remember how we talked on Friday? We didn't do the backups. And he said, oops. And so went away. And where does Percona fit into this other than us all freaking out at the same time? Well, we said, we don't have backups. What are we going to do about it? And at the time, I'll forget exactly the specific version, but it was obviously some 5x version of MySQL. There was a project going on at the time called Undrop, by a gentleman who worked with Percona, Alexander Kuzminski. He wrote this piece of software on GitHub. You can still go get it. And it lets you do data recovery of your MySQL databases. Because if you're not aware of this, but when MySQL deletes, whether it's a delete statement or a drop database, the data's gone from the running database. You're not going to see it there. Okay, you're going to go to select on it or show database. It's not there, of course. But it didn't actually delete the files from the file system. It just unlinks an inode. It marks the pages as deleted, but they're not actually gone until they're overwritten. So with this Undrop tool, we were able to, over the course of the next 48 hours, zero sleep by anybody on their side and on Percona's. We had a whole, everybody, you know, wake up and let's deal with this. We ran this overnight, multiple days, recovered, I don't know, 80, maybe 90% of the data. And they said, good enough, YOLO, let's get this thing out the door. So we reloaded the database, opened the doors back up, and got them up and running. And wow, let me tell you, that was a rough day. I got pulled off of all my other projects to work on this. It was just help these guys out from tip to tail. And so it's a bit challenging to talk about these situations where, you know, in the short term, we were able to successfully recover a lot of the data. We were able to get this business back up onto its feet. It's an organization that had over 5,000 developers at the time. And then over the future, you know, things didn't go so well. This was a very difficult thing to be down for 3 days, even in, you know, the early 2010s. That's a long time to be offline. That's a long time to miss revenue. That's a long time to be abandoned by your users. And that's eventually what happened. But in the short term, it was a very successful in the sense of bad thing happened, but we were able to recover it with, you know, a fairly good success rate. I would have obviously loved 100% recovery, but in a lot of these cases, you know, you just can't get that back. So we did our best. This customer was very happy, at least, that we were able to recover something and get their business back up. Oh, actually it says 98%. Okay, so it was better than I thought. We did miss some records, but we got the website back up and running. Okay, and so for them, you know, there was not necessarily, it was a return, it wasn't a save some money, it was make the faucet of revenue turn back on again. And that's what we were able to do for this customer. It was a really exciting time. Again, I would not wish that on anybody, that they go through that sort of a thing. Maybe you've all got your own scenarios, or we could have a very long afternoon talking about who's got the worst story, the worst one. And I'm sure there's worse than mine, okay? But I'd like to highlight that one to talk about how it's real, how it could happen to anybody, okay? And now moving into the last one here, this one is around MongoDB. Okay, MongoDB has a very particular presence in the industry. They've done some very unique things around licensing, and they've done some changes around how they sell to you, in the sense of they want everything to be behind a cloud front, a database as a service, and they call that Atlas. That's great, but they're also very aggressive on their pricing. Now, I'm not on the sales team, so I don't ever talk numbers, but I do know that their number is bigger than many other numbers. Okay, and they take advantage of that. You're vendor locked in, and they leverage that. In our case, we were approached with, hey, the screws are really being put to us by MongoDB. Is there anything you can do to help us, Percona? And so we sat back, we looked at some of the features they were missing. They needed enterprise level stuff. That's things that they were convinced were only available in Atlas until they came to us and we said, no. We have all of that in Mongo as well from our side, our Percona server for MongoDB. You can get TDE, you can get LDAP auth, you can get a backup service. And long story short, because I'm a little bit short on time here, but they came to us. We got them a better rate than they were paying, that they were going to have to pay to Mongo. They were able to leave that very tense and awkward relationship with MongoDB, became a Percona customer, and are very happy to this day with the software that we write and that we support for them. So it was a really good fit, saved them some money, and it also made them feel better because now, also, I don't know about any of you, but I feel very particular about open source. I look to work in this industry for another, hopefully, cross my fingers, another 20 years. But after that, what's our legacy going to be? And I think that's what's important about open source, is that it lives longer than us. And so whether it's Percona's open source or Linux's or Red Hat's or anybody's open source, I think that's a great gift we'd only give to our generation, our kids' generation, and so on, but to the world itself. And so I think open source is just a fantastic angle to approach. And for me, it's important to mention it when the vibe changes, when companies can make decisions that are both economic and for the good of the world.